Lula has an outburst after the federal police and the United States target major figures allegedly linked to Primeiro Comando da Capital in an operation that put Brasilia, São Paulo, and Washington in the same crisis.
Estela, Stephanie Nunes, and Henrique de Oliveira complete the jewel. According to the federal police, she is already under arrest. And the esteemed one, another sanctioned individual, is currently a fugitive, considered a fugitive by the federal police in an operation investigating money laundering. Just a reminder, after the classification of PCC and Comando Vermelho as terrorist organizations by the U.S. State Department, by the United States government, now we have one. We have an operation targeting money laundering, which in fact has resulted in 7 people being arrested, among them, therefore, Estela, Stephanie Nunes, and Henrique de Oliveira.
The federal police launched this Friday, July 3rd, 2026 Operation Exchange to dismantle a suspected scheme of laundering money from international drug trafficking. While the United States government had already sanctioned key members of this network 2 days earlier, Estela, Stephanie Nunes, and Henrique de Oliveira were arrested. Vitor Henrique de Oliveira, who is considered important and was identified by the United States Treasury as a key figure in the São Paulo branch of the network, remains at large. The situation is exploding politically because the Lula government reacted to the sanctions and pressure from the United States by trying to push a sovereignty narrative, but the hard fact remains. The offensive targeted Brazilians accused of moving large amounts of money, using crypto assets, transporting funds, and operating companies suspected of serving as the financial arm of crime. At the same time, Flavio Bolsonaro accused Lula of acting against Brazil, Flavio who works to prevent tariffs on Brazilian products. He defended PIX and stated that the people cannot be punished for the government's mistakes. What is Lula trying to turn into a diplomatic fight? Why did the reaction come precisely when the target is money linked to crime? How a money laundering operation became a political crisis for the government, I'll explain shortly. If you like this kind of straightforward and no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. See you next time. In the first updates of the morning, Estela Estefani was among those arrested, while Victor Shimada had not yet been located.
She was detained in the city of Santos and is being brought here to the federal police headquarters. We are following this operation with the federal police officers here at the São Paulo headquarters. On the streets are reporting, along with the reporting of our colleague Isabella Leite. So, the action is against these 2 sanctioned Brazilians. Remember, besides the 2 of them, there is a connection between these 2 people. With 3 CNPJs, 3 companies that are headquartered here in São Paulo itself, plus a Portuguese company with ties to Portugal. But also connected to these 2, connected to Shimada, who is on the run. It's important to highlight that. And in the classification, here is his photo, Shimada, who is on the run. And for the United States government, they already had enough information to classify them as terrorists because they saw a case of money laundering and a direct connection with the first command of the capital.
The court also ordered the seizure of assets, funds, and crypto assets of the suspects up to the limit of 10.4 billion reais. The investigation targets a structure suspected of laundering money from international drug trafficking. According to information released about the operation, the group used illicit crypto asset transfers, transportation of cash, high-value bank transactions, and transfers between individuals and legal entities. The federal police reports a movement of over 10 billion reais. That's too much money circulating within a system that, according to the authorities, needed to be dismantled before it continued funding criminal operations. The United States Treasury stated that the network operated from 2 main locations, Florida and São Paulo. In the statement, Shimada is mentioned as the link between operators of the Primeiro Comando da Capital in Florida and international traffickers. The United States accuses the organization of laundering more than $30 million in illicit funds generated in several American cities, also using cryptocurrencies to send money back to Brazil for the benefit of the faction. Stella Stephanie is mentioned in the Treasury statement as a relative and close collaborator of Shimada. She allegedly acted as a secretary and intermediary in collecting large sums of money, providing logistical support to the laundering network. The sanctions list also targeted companies linked to the group. The United States Office of Foreign Assets Control included Victory Trading, intermediação de negócios, cobranças e tecnologia, PixWave Soluções de Pagamentos, Wave Construções Inteligentes, and Avenidas Flutuantes, the latter based in Portugal. In practice, the assets and interests of these targets under United States jurisdiction are frozen, and people subject to American rules are prohibited from doing business with them. Victor Shimada also has another factor that increases the political weight of the case. He had already been investigated for money laundering involving Corinthians and Vidibet. The United States Treasury mentioned that one of his companies was allegedly used in an advertising fraud scheme linked to diverted funds. Dinheiro desviado de clube brasileiro. CNN and other Brazilian outlets also recalled that Shimada had already appeared in an investigation into a financial operation involving the contract between Corinthians and Vidibet.
Involving, for example, money laundering in a case of PCC infiltration in a contract involving Corinthians and Vidibet. That was one of the pieces of information. But that's not all. Shimada faces other investigations, and Estela is connected to him. With these companies here, payment companies, it's something that for the police and the public prosecutor's office, the connections and links between these two people and money laundering crimes are very clear.
Now he appears in a much more serious front, sanctioned for an alleged connection with a money laundering network linked to the Primeiro Comando da Capital and wanted by the federal police. The political crisis grew because the Lula government had been complaining about pressure from the United States precisely at the moment when Washington toughened its stance against Brazilian factions. The US government had already classified the Primeiro Comando da Capital as an organization linked to international drug trafficking and used executive powers to target people identified as supporters or operators of the network. The problem for Lula is that the narrative of defending sovereignty loses strength when foreign action targets suspects of laundering money for a faction that controls territories, intimidates families, and moves billions. Flávio Bolsonaro entered this debate accusing Lula of trying to turn punishments against criminals and commercial pressure into an electoral platform.
Lula is the only one who wants heavy tariffs against Brazilian products. He provoked, ranted, didn't negotiate, and lobbied in favor of PCC and Comando Vermelho so they wouldn't be classified as terrorists. He embarrassed Brazil in the eyes of the world and ignored the suffering of more than 50 million Brazilians who live in areas dominated by these narco-terrorists. He did it believing he could turn the possible punishment of Brazilian companies into the false narrative of defending sovereignty. Lula doesn't care about Brazil. He'll do anything to try to get re-elected. I'm the opposite of Lula. I fight against the narco-terrorists, I really work against the tariffs, and I will always defend our PIX, which was created during Bolsonaro's government. PIX is Brazilian, it's free of charge, and no one messes with it. I have already made this defense personally in the United States, together with President Trump, alongside the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Next week, I'll return to the United States to reinforce this defense. My request is simple. Don't impose tariffs on Brazil. Don't punish Brazilians for the mistakes of Lula and Lulopetismo. Brazil will truly be great. Brazil has a future, but we don't have any more time to waste.
He stated that he asked the United States not to impose tariffs on Brazil and not to punish Brazilians for the mistakes of Lula and Lulopetismo. He also said that he fights against narco-terrorists, works against tariffs, and defends PIX, which was created during Bolsonaro's government. The statement came after Lula called Flávio's actions a betrayal of the country and said that Brazilian sovereignty is not for sale. Flávio tried to separate two things, defending PIX and preventing Brazil from being hit with tariffs. In a statement submitted to the US trade body, he argued that PIX should not be connected to cross-border payment systems from non-Western networks, saying that this could reduce Washington's concerns. At the same time, he stated that tariffs would be the wrong remedy because they would affect companies, workers, and investments. Lula responded by saying that the proposal would hand over PIX to foreign interests. That's when the crisis becomes more evident. On the other hand, the United States sanctions individuals identified as operators of a money laundering network linked to the First Capital Command. On the other hand, the federal police arrest Estela and target Chimada in an operation that mentions billions of reais being moved. In the middle, Lula tries to shift the discussion to the field of sovereignty.
For example, the United States Department of the Treasury sanctioned Victor for alleged connections. He has already been investigated for being a financial operator in a money laundering scheme involving Corinthians and also a betting company, Vai Debate. As for Estela Stephanie, she is also sanctioned. She was mentioned by the United States as a close associate and relative of Victor, who is a fugitive according to the federal police, having worked as his secretary and intermediary for collecting large sums of money.
The Lula government was cornered because the operation did not come from electoral rhetoric. It involves court warrants, freezing of assets, formal sanctions, the United States Treasury list, and suspicion of money from international drug trafficking. The political reaction may even try to shift the focus, but the image that remains is of a financial machine being exposed at the very moment Brasilia was discussing tariffs, PX, sovereignty, and relations with Washington. The operation is moving forward with documents, assets, crypto assets, and companies that may reveal how the network operated from the inside.
See, we're speaking here in front of the Federal Police Headquarters, the Superintendent's office, here in São Paulo, in this breaking news, already at the door, waiting for the arrival of the vehicles. At this moment, there's still no movement around here, but the information we have is that the Federal Police are carrying out these warrants this morning in Operation Exchange, which aims to dismantle this criminal operation for money laundering of money coming from drug trafficking. More than 50 police officers. The federal agents are executing 13 search and seizure warrants and 11 arrest warrants issued by the 7th Federal Court here in São Paulo. The court also ordered the seizure of assets, funds, and crypto assets of the suspects up to the amount of 10.4 billion reais. The federal police investigations indicate that the suspects used a structured system to move funds through transfers, lists of both money and crypto assets, and the transportation of funds, including cash.
The political impact also affects the dispute between Lula and Flávio Bolsonaro. Lula chose to call Flávio's initiative in the United States a betrayal of the country. Flávio responded by saying that Lula is the one who wants the high tariffs because he supposedly provoked, didn't negotiate, and even tried to prevent the classification of factions as terrorists. In this clash, the operation against those sanctioned landed like a bomb in the government's lap. While Lula was talking about sovereignty, the federal police was arresting a target mentioned by Washington. The pressure now isn't just in political circles. It's in the banks, in the brokerage firms, in the companies, in the contracts, and in the crypto assets that may have been used to funnel dirty money. The federal police targets the money trail because that's where crime is affected. Brazil can't waste time protecting political narratives while factions grow, take over territories, and connect to international networks. The problem isn't Washington acting against the cartel. The problem is that Brasilia seems more upset with external pressure than with the exposed criminal structure. What has already emerged explains the tension. A network suspected of laundering drug money, targets sanctioned by the United States, an arrest in Brazil, a high-profile fugitive, billions frozen, and a political crisis hanging over Lula's government. While the Planalto tries to defend its narrative, the investigation follows the most uncomfortable path, the path of the money. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. Support our project and contribute financially through the Pix key that appears on your screen. We are an independent channel, focused on keeping you informed with the truth. Your contribution helps us keep going.